started doing this training a couple of years ago in this format. And I've done this, I don't know, dozens and dozens of times for organizations around the state. And one of the reasons that we really developed this is that we've gotten a lot of questions as the world has changed and gone more digital. One of the questions is, number one, how in the world do I raise kids that can navigate a digital world in a healthy and safe way? How do I, as a person, navigate that world? How do I help others? And so that's really going to be what this training is. We're going to look at the reality of what the world looks like today. We're going to touch into some kind of high use areas, things like social media, things like gaming, cyberbullying, and just kind of hopefully help give you a snapshot of what this digital world looks like. And then even more importantly, how in the world we navigate that and help others navigate that in a healthy way. Because the option to not engage with the digital world no longer exists, right? It's just the reality is that we do live in a digital world. And so I'm actually going to spend a lot of time in this, sharing my screen, kind of walking you through some slides. So you're not going to see my face a ton on this. You're mostly going to see the slide. So the first thing I want to touch on is, so I am the executive director of Love Alaska, but one of our initiatives is Priceless, and Priceless walks with trafficking survivors here in Alaska. And the reason that internet safety is such a big deal to us in Priceless is that we have seen the internet become the primary place that both trafficking and the recruitment of it happens and begins, right? What used to happen primarily on street corners and alleys and hotel rooms still does happen there, but it largely originates in digital spaces. And so we really feel like if we're going to fight trafficking effectively, we have to understand the digital world. And so that's why this falls under Priceless. Again, this is an internet safety training. And these are the kind of things I'm going to cover. I'm going to talk about the current digital landscape, talk about kind of the what is. We're going to touch on the big one, which really is social media. We'll look into gaming, cyberbullying, sexting, online predators, and then just kind of some best practices to stay safe. Now, a lot of the things on here are resources pulled from lots of different organizations, lots of our partner organizations. But to be honest with you, some of them are just things that I've learned through living in a digital world. My wife and I, apart from being the executive director of Love Alaska, we share our life online through YouTube. About 1 million minutes of our life is watched every single month by people around the world. And we've realized that if we're going to share our life in that way, we have to figure out a way to do it safely. And so a lot of the tips that I'm going to talk about in here are things that we put into practice to keep ourselves safe as we ourselves navigate this digital space. So this is where I want to start, is just what does current internet use tell us? Like, let's look at the what is first. And here's the thing, all of us know that internet's a big deal. It's not going away. This is the reality of life. But it's actually pretty interesting when you think of the numbers. There are currently 5 billion active internet users in the world. So half of all internet use is on mobile devices. And this is a number that is actually increasing significantly as we see low-cost internet go into places of the world that are still developing, right? We see a lot of low-cost carriers. We see access to data and digital now basically being available everywhere in the world. One of the things I thought was really interesting, and this is kind of startling to me, honestly, is in 2015, 11% of 8-year-olds owned a smartphone. By 2019, that number was 19%. Almost 1 in 5 8-year-olds access to a smartphone. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why that can be an issue. Now, I do want to say something right from the beginning. I am a believer that we should not reject these kind of things, but we need to look for ways to redeem them and operate in a healthy way, right? And so simply saying cell phones or smartphones or the internet is bad isn't an appropriate response in a digital world. We have to figure out how we use these things in a healthy way. And then as far as internet use, almost 7 hours per day spent online. That number is much higher. Actually, South Africa is the highest internet use country in the world, over 10 hours a day. Some countries like Japan are significantly among the lowest, surprisingly enough, at around 4.5 hours a day. But globally, we're seeing about 7 hours per day spent online. And so, just as I said, based on those things, that almost everybody in the world, the vast majority of the world's population, now has access and is now connected and is now using it. They're becoming younger and younger. How in the world do we stay safe? And how are we equipped to do this in a healthy way? And I want to start with social media, because social media really is the biggest, this is the biggest user or the biggest use, but it's also the place that we see the most harm done when it comes to this issue of trafficking. 4.5 billion social media users. Those are people with active accounts. Those are people actively using social media around the world. And it's not just younger generations. Almost 50% of boomers and 90% of millennials are using social media daily. That's not once in a while, that's daily. And then almost, go back, 2.5 hours are spent on social media every single day. So that's a lot of time that people are spending scrolling and comparing and kind of watching other people's lives. This to me is where it starts to understand why trainings like this matter. 54% of teens said that if parents actually knew what was happening on social media, they would be more concerned about it. And so to me, this is such good proof as to why this matters, why we need to pay attention to this. And social media it's an ever-changing landscape. And so when we think of social media, we do tend to think of Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Pinterest. But the reality is there are actually hundreds and hundreds of social media platforms around the world. In fact, some of the biggest social media platforms in the world aren't even ones that we have here in the United States. There are social media platforms specific to countries. But then there are also social media platforms specific to interests. You know, my wife is a huge reader, and one of her favorite social media platforms is something called Goodreads, right? It's where she can log her books and talk with other book nerds and that kind of stuff, right? And so there's social media platforms based around interests and based around other things. So it's not just Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. There actually are hundreds of these. And that's one of the reasons, especially as I talk to parents or grandparents, that this can feel so overwhelming, because it's not just about learning Facebook, right? It's not just about learning one of these platforms. It's about understanding how in the world you learn this stuff when it changes all of the time. Some of the concerns with social media use, these are some of the biggest ones without a doubt. First of all, it's really difficult to know who you're actually talking to. It is incredibly easy to set up an account. It's incredibly easy to steal a picture off of line and to write a bio and to create fake posts to create a false persona. There's also a ton of secrecy within apps, you know, things like disappearing images, even Instagram adding those kind of things with their new vanish feature in messages, things that are sent that then instantly go away. As I touched on, it's easier to set up multiple accounts. And it can be really difficult for parents and grandparents to monitor because the conversation just moves so fast, right? It's not like you have 1 or 2 posts to look through a day. I mean, it's hundreds and thousands of things, right? If you're on social media, you just kind of watch your feed move so fast, it can feel really overwhelming. And so I want to touch on one of the things I said, which is the prevalence of other accounts. Now, the term is Finsta. Basically, it's just fake Instagram, right? It's a secondary account that you use. And what this means is that a kid may have a primary account, and that's the account that they friend mom and dad on. That's the account they friend maybe their teachers or their aunts and uncles and grandparents on. But then there's this secondary account where the things that you don't want the parents to see get posted, right? It's the account that you only have your friends connected to. And this isn't just like a small thing. In fact, 15% of girls 9 to 12 said they have one. 10% said they don't want to say, which I'm going to be honest, that's probably a yes. 38% of girls 13 to 17 said yes, 10% not to say. So that's almost half of them probably have a secondary Instagram account that the adults in their life aren't even aware of. And the numbers with boys are slightly lower, but not much, 13% and then 21%. So this really is a prevalent thing that if you think you're looking at the main account, you may not be, right? You may not even be seeing the majority of what they're posting online because of these secondary accounts, because they're so easy to make. And so now I want to talk about trafficking in social media. So why does this matter to an organization like Priceless? Well, according to Hope for Justice in 2020, of the underage victims that were recruited in active sex trafficking cases, these are actual cases, 65% were recruited from Facebook, 14% recruited from Instagram, 8% recruited from Snapchat. And I want to tell you how this works a little bit. This is a real case from right here in Anchorage. The FBI tells this story. They've told it a number of times. It's of a girl who went to a local high school here in town, and she received an Instagram message from a boy who said that he was going to be going to her school starting the next school year. His family was moving to Anchorage, and he was looking to make friends at his new school. Now, that is not a strange message, right? There's a lot about that that feels very real. And so what happens is that they messaged each other hundreds of times. And after a number of messages, this boy is no longer a stranger, right? He's a friend. There's been trust built, there's been relationship built. And in her mind, that's exactly who this was. So they continue to message each other, and she believes that they enter into a relationship. And what happened, as happens in a large percentage of relationships today, and we'll touch on this later, he gets her to send one nude photo. And at that point, that was when the hook was set. And essentially his entire tone changed. And what he said was, I know that your dad works at company X in Anchorage. I know that this is where you go to school. I know this is where your mom works. If you don't now send X number of photos and videos, we're going to email this to your dad's work. This girl here in Anchorage went into self-protection mode, right? All she's thinking about is, how in the world do I not let this get worse, right? I'm going to do what they tell me because I'm trying to protect myself and my family, and I don't want them to be disappointed in me. And that led all the way to her meeting people at a hotel here in Anchorage, having sex, taking the money she was given, leaving it outside for her trafficker to pick up. She was trafficked through Instagram DMs, never met her trafficker. That's why this stuff matters, is that happened here in our city to a girl in one of our high schools. And so when we talk about online recruitment and knowing who you're talking to, that's why this stuff matters, because those kind of things do happen in today's world. And just as these numbers say, these primarily recruitment is happening online. So now just some best practices, because I don't know, I think you can hear that kind of stuff and just be like, all right, I'm deleting it all, right? I'm like, okay, Instagram's off my phone, Facebook's off my phone. I'm making sure my kids never use it. But again, I think that we can use these things in a healthy way as long as we put some of these practices in place. First of all, things like location services are always turned off. They just are. It's so easy to find the location of a person based on posts and based on what they have turned on. The other thing I would say is that never believe that the person you're talking to is the person you're talking to. There are just so many people that can pose as somebody else online that it's really important to always be skeptical of that. And in that we're not giving away personal information, right? We're not giving away information on neighborhoods we could live in. We're not giving away information on places we may be going, that sort of stuff. And so those kind of best practices. The other thing, as far as for those of you adults who may be thinking about best practices for kids or grandkids, talk about this stuff, right? That girl who was trafficked here in Anchorage through Instagram DM, one of the things that the FBI said that she told them is that she wished she had one person when things got really bad that she felt she could have gone to and talked about this early on before it got so bad. And so have honest conversations about social media use. Ask to have passwords. Talk about things like fake accounts. Talk about things like secondary accounts. Hey, I heard that this is popular. What do you know about this kind of stuff? Here's the reality. They're probably not going to tell you if they have one, but you can start having honest conversations about social media with that. One of the other things, and I'll mention this later, is just remind them that the internet is written in pen, not in pencil, right? Things that are created and put out there really are permanent. It's very difficult to get things back, right? And so when you put stuff out there, when you're sharing stuff, when you're posting stuff, that is the stuff that is written in pen, not in pencil. One of the things in gaming is that we see any open chat feature largely being a way that they reach out. And so friend requests, trying to then build a relationship or a connection, trying to move conversations into private spaces is a big thing. So let's say somebody like is making a post on, if you have I'm thinking of like practical examples. We have a friend of ours who they went on a family vacation. They posted family photos. They have a 14-year-old daughter. They tagged her in those photos. So they showed up on her Instagram or on her Facebook page. It was a beach vacation, so she was in a bathing suit. And what happened was that she started getting messages from somebody she was friends with, like private messages about the public photo, saying, hey, saw this photo, you looked great in that kind of stuff. So look for people who are trying to take conversations to private spaces. That's always a really red flag, right? If they won't say if they won't say those things to you in public. So look for that. So Messenger really is a big one, but it normally is preceded by a friend request on Facebook. So now let's talk about gaming, because I just touched on that. This is a newer one, but a really fast growing one. And when I say online gaming, I'm talking about things like Twitch, which is a platform where people can stream themselves or others playing games. It's a huge deal. In April, almost 2 billion hours were watched on Twitch alone. And one of the things that Twitch we see happening a lot, and why this is big to trafficking, is that you see communities and relationships and friendships really being formed around specific games. So you have people who go into these communities, into these games, and they're building actual friendships. The problem with social media is that you don't know who you're building the friendship with. Here's the thing. If you're a 15-year-old boy who does not think with all of the right parts of his brain, and there is a 16-year-old girl who joins your guild, you are going to do anything she says. The problem is that a lot of times it's not a 16-year-old girl. It can be a predator. It can be somebody who's looking to build trust or gain access to you. And so again, we just want to be really careful in any place online that we're building community. So gaming, and I want to give just one more example before I move on. This happened right here at Priceless. We received a message on our Facebook page a few years ago, and it was late at night, and I got the notification. And it was from a mom here in the peninsula, which is like Kenai Soldotna area of Alaska. It was kind of it was a very frantic message from her. She had discovered, she had 2 daughters, both of them gamed on Twitch, but the rule was, because she was trying to put things into place to help protect her daughters, the rule is that they had to share an account. And her thought was that if her daughters shared an account, then they'd kind of be able to keep each other responsible, accountable a little bit. If one was saying something or doing something, the other would tell, which did largely work until it was found out that one of the daughters was talking to somebody, and then what she was doing was clearing all of her chat before she gave the account back to her sister. Except one night she forgot to clear the chat. The sister logs in and she sees this conversation with her sister and a guy who was coming to Alaska to visit her, like on the way to Alaska to visit her. The mother goes to Google and starts searching trafficking Alaska, human trafficking Alaska. That's just where her mind went. And she found our organization's Facebook page. And she reached out and basically she said, here's the situation. Here's all the chat. I have a ton of red flags about this. Her daughter was underage. What do I do? So we were able to connect her with the FBI. The FBI got involved, and it was not a teenager coming to visit her in Alaska. It was, in fact, a middle-aged man who was a registered sex offender on his way to visit a girl on the peninsula in Alaska because they became friends on this gaming platform. Again, the goal is not to not use gaming platforms. The goal is not to not use Twitch. It's not to not use Instagram or Facebook. The goal is to remember that everybody on these platforms is not who they say they are. And we have got to train ourselves. We've got to train the next generation how to look at people online through a more realistic lens, so that you're not a 14-year-old girl playing your favorite game on Twitch and a 35-year-old man from California is flying to do who knows what to you, right? That's what we're trying to prevent. So now let's talk about cyberbullying. One of the most prevalent things that we're seeing, 37% of youth say that they have been cyberbullied. 17% said that it's happened in the past 30 days. Now, here's what I want to say. These numbers are about 2 years old. I haven't been able to find more updated numbers yet. I have no doubt this is just continuing to increase, right? And so these numbers, I'm sure, are north of that. 87% of youth say that they've seen cyberbullying happen. Girls are more likely to be cyberbullied than boys. 36% of girls to 26% of boys. And sorry. So here's how we identify that. And here's what I want you to know. A lot of this is very similar to what we look for in real IRL bullying, right? In real life bullying. One of the biggest ones is that they stop using their devices. Most youth, young adults, teens are very, very connected to devices, right? We saw that in the statistics. They spend so much of their time tied to a device or connected to a device that when there is this abrupt stop to the use of devices, that is a big red flag. Now, sometimes that's a very healthy thing. I've actually dealt with parents who saw this red flag. I got involved, I met with the family, and it legit turns out that their son just said, I think I have a technology addiction and I want to stop. That's great. Most of the time, that's not the case, right? And so if a device that they're on a significant part of their day is something they no longer want to be on, there could be something happening where they no longer feel safe in those digital spaces where they are. And then a lot of these other things are just kind of good things to look for in any type of bullying. They feel very withdrawn, very distant, right? No desire to connect, no desire to talk. They don't want to have deeper conversations. It's very surface. They feel very, very detached. If they protest going to either school or church or any other of events, because remember, most of us, we had our school friends, our sports friends, we had these different pools of friends. Well, now all of those friends are also connected in digital spaces, right? And so your school friends are also your Instagram friends. Your church friends are also your Instagram friends. Your sports friends are also you're also following each other on TikTok. And so all of this overlaps. So if they are super involved in something and really love it, and like that's kind of what they do, and then all of a sudden they have no desire, or even they want to stay away from certain things, there's probably a reason. There's most likely something that has happened. It could just be internal, like personal conflict. It could be something more serious like bullying or cyberbullying. And then things, obviously attempted self-harm. We see cyberbullying lead to suicide, lead to attempted suicide all of the time, because the thing is that you feel like there's no escaping a digital world, right? There's no getting away from it. And so if I'm being bullied in a digital space, it can be very easy to start to think that the only way out is suicide, because I can't get away from digital. I can get away from school, I can get away from sports, I can get away from these other things, but I can't get away from this digital world. And if that space feels unsafe, suicide starts to become a viable option. And we see that over and over in many of our youth. And then, of course, things like changes in eating or sleeping habits. Again, a lot of these are things that we look for in all types of bullying, right? Not just cyberbullying, but certainly with cyberbullying, the big one is if they seem very withdrawn or distant from their devices, if they no longer want to be using Twitch, if they no longer want to be using TikTok, if they no longer want to be using certain things that they used to really find community or friendship or belonging in, there may be something that's going on there. Now let's talk sexting. And again, the reason we talk about this, and I'll use this term a little bit later, is that predators. When I say predators, it's an online predator, it's a trafficker, it's any person. They primarily exploit vulnerabilities. That's what they do. They look for a vulnerability and they look for a way to exploit it. As with the girl that I told you about, who was trafficked via Instagram DM, the vulnerability was that once she had given one photo, he knew that he could manipulate the shame around this spreading more, right? And sexting can be used very much for this. And what I'm talking about here, just to be clear, these are underage youth, right? Like who are being manipulated into this stuff. Now, 1 in 5 girls between the ages of 13 and 17 and 1 in 10 boys reported they already have shared their own nude photos. 1 in 5 between 13 and 17. Now, just so we're clear, in the United States, any nude photo shared between a minor, which all of these ages would be, is a federal crime, right? And so we're talking about criminal acts here. This isn't just a photo shared between a boyfriend and a girlfriend who would be in junior high or high school. In fact, 40% of them agreed it's normal for people my age to share nudes with each other. 13 to 17. I am not talking about adults here. I'm not talking about people who are married in relationships. I'm talking about kids, 13 to 17-year-olds. That is staggering to me. It is normal for people my age. There's a significant number of youth pornographic images that are self-generated. In fact, in the largest pornography bust ever, it's estimated that about 30% of all images of minors that were uncovered in this bust were self-generated. What that means is that they were taken by the person and then sent, not taken of the person. Pictures are easily passed around, friend groups, social media. In fact, we know of websites, of private groups where essentially these things are largely traded. You post, do you know X person who goes to X school, and do you have a photo of her? Or do you have a photo of him? These are groups that exist. These are groups that we've helped blow the whistle on even here in our own city. And then here's the thing that I mentioned. Most youth don't even realize that sexual pictures of themselves and others can constitute child pornography. And so if you send a photo to a boyfriend and the boyfriend sends that photo to his friends, we are talking about a crime, right? This is a criminal act when that photo then gets sent on. And most youth don't think of the implications or the ramifications of that. So this is the term I said earlier. Online predators primarily exploit vulnerabilities. That's what they do. They look for any vulnerability and they exploit it. A vulnerability is not always a bad thing. Sometimes when you hear the word vulnerability, you think of maybe it's just a youth who experiences, I don't know, they're experiencing homelessness or substance abuse issues or mental health issues. A vulnerability is also a youth who can have a wonderful home life, parents who love them so very much, but have not equipped them for the reality of this digital world. They have not equipped them to help understand that every DM they receive is not necessarily from the person they say it is, right? A vulnerability can sometimes just simply be being naive and not knowing and not understanding. And it's the reason that we do this training, is that if we can help one youth or one parent or one grandparent or aunt and uncle stop and take a second look at something that they wouldn't have, then that's one less vulnerability, right, in this world. Because online predators are out there. They are pursuing constantly online. In fact, 1 in 25 youth. Now, here's what I want to do. You might read this and think that's not a very high number. Let me explain this. 1 in 25 youth in 1 year received an online sexual solicitation where the solicitor tried to make offline contact. So this is not just somebody who said, hey, will you send me a photo? It's not somebody who was just like, hey, I saw your bikini photo from your family vacation, you look great. It was not somebody who just simply kept their inappropriate interaction online. 1 in 25, the person tried to make contact with them offline. They tried to turn this into a real life connection, meetup, and I think all of us know what happens when that happens, right? This is where what happens online doesn't just stay online. And so here are just some tips that I think are really important. Some of these things we covered. Number one, be smart about what you post on the internet. It's written in pen, it's not written on pencil. If you go on a family vacation, think about who you're tagging and tagging your kids, because there are people who search things like Instagram for hashtag family vacation or hashtag beach vacation, because the second they do, they have millions and millions of images that innocent families are posting that are now accessible to them. With one search of a hashtag, they have found users and accounts that they can pursue. And here is how I remember the story of one trafficker saying that he would walk through a local mall and he'd walk up to a girl and he'd pay her a compliment, right? He'd walk up and say, hey, I love the way that shirt looks on you, or I love something else. If she looked him in the eyes, he knew that he should keep walking, keep moving on. But if when he paid her a compliment, she looked at the ground, he knew there was something in her that he could exploit, whether it was an insecurity, whether it was something that was, you know what I mean? There was something in her that he felt he could manipulate and exploit. And the exact same thing is true on the internet. A trafficker will find that account, find that photo, send a DM. Based on the response, will decide whether to pursue or not. In fact, one of my friends and one of our partners here is a lady named Adrian, and Adrian runs a mentoring group for young women and boys. And one of the biggest things that Adrian does is teaches her girls that when you're approached by a stranger, have confidence. Even if you don't feel confident, have confidence, because that will many times keep a predator from pursuing. And then the second thing, as I mentioned, just have regular conversations about this stuff. Talk about internet use and safety. You don't have to have all of the answers. In fact, lead with the fact that you don't, right? Lead with the fact that, you know what? The world you're growing up in is so different than what I grew up in. And I want you to help me just understand this stuff. Like, what are you doing? What are you using? What is TikTok? Why are we spending 13 hours a day scrolling on it? Like, ask questions to help them teach you. Regular conversation is so important, as is regular monitoring. I have no problem with parents having passwords to minors' internet accounts. I think that's great. So you can log in and so you can know. I think monitoring the kind of things they're doing, hey, who are you talking to? Like, what's going on? That is not hovering. That is not being invasive. That is protecting in a digital world. And then ensure that youth have a trusted person that they can go to. I told you that story of the young girl here in Anchorage. Her story ends differently if she had one person. And a lot of times that person isn't mom and dad, right? Because there's consequences if they go tell mom. There could be consequences if they go tell dad. And so ensure that there's someone in their life that knows that if you make a decision that maybe you think is the wrong one and you know you messed up, that you can come to me and we can talk about this without consequence, right? Like, I want to be here for you. Having that one person, whether it is a mentor, whether it is an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a family friend, is so unbelievably important. And then use parental controls. This is one of the best things, is that there are lots of parameters that you can put on your kids' devices and on the platforms they use. Use the heck out of those. That's a really great thing. Again, it's about protecting, not controlling. And then this kind of the last thing is remember that our goal in this is to equip them to live in a digital world in a healthy way, not in a fearful way or in a naive way. We do live in a digital world. We will continue to live in a digital world. And predators and traffickers and people with nefarious intent are doing the very best they can to learn how to exploit that at every step. And so then it is our responsibility to learn then how to operate in this digital world in a healthy way, right? That's the goal of this. And so if you want to connect with us at Priceless, we're on Facebook. I'm sure many of you already are connected with us. You can visit us online. Some of the stories we deal with are really hard here, right? And so I tried to touch into a couple of those stories without like ruining your day. Really, to me, the biggest thing is the realization that the world we are in now is very different than the one that most of us grew up in. It's just different. 10 years ago, I never thought twice about who I got a friend request from, right? I never wondered if my top 8 on MySpace were the real people they said they were, because I knew they were. It's not the same anymore. Things have changed. And because they've changed, we have to look at this space through a more realistic lens. And helping the young people in our lives do that can save them a whole lot of hurt. I update this every few months. And here's what I'll say. Every time I go to update my numbers, they're not moving in the right direction. The numbers, in fact, I updated them yesterday. It's more people online. It's more people, especially during COVID. And this is kind of the last point I'll make, since I don't see any questions. A lot of this stuff, we're still figuring out how the last 2 years will impact this. Because here's one thing that we know. One of the biggest things that can be a risk is access to unlimited internet in private for youth, right? When they have access to this device by themselves for as long as they want, that's a really dangerous thing. And what we've seen over the last 2 years, as we largely have been apart, we've seen those numbers increase. We've seen devices increase, we've seen use of devices increase, and we've seen access to those devices in private spaces increase. So I am a huge believer that this doesn't get to go in bedrooms at night, because in all the families I've ever worked with, I've never seen that end well, right? I just haven't. And so remember, we just need to be smart. And I hope that this has helped us do that. Sextortion is a growing problem. Yeah, absolutely it is. And sextortion just, is basically extortion based on whether it's photos you send or videos you send or even messages you send, right? It's taking those things, and just in the story I said, once you have a photo of somebody, the hook is set to be able to manipulate them to get whatever it is you want, whether that's money, whether that is anything else. And so it is a growing problem. It's a growing problem, actually, if you look through kind of all age groups. It's not just youth that sextortion is an issue. It's a lot of it. So yeah, thanks you guys. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you listening to what I know is a hard subject, but again, If it helps one, right? It's worth it.